Welcome to the Thriving in Motherhood podcast. Today I'm here with my husband, Andrew Jackson. We got a great question about what does planning look like as a couple. So many of you have gone through the free Plan a Week You Can Win training. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend you check that out. I go over a lot of the common mistakes we make as moms when we're trying to plan, as well as how to fix it. And so you can be really effective and efficient with your planning so that your time and energy is going towards the things that you need and want to do, and not just getting drowned in the busyness or getting stuck in boredom or being frustrated because you can't do the things you want. But how does that translate then to planning together?
As a couple.
Hi, I'm Jessica Jackson, and this is the new way to thrive in motherhood by leaning into who you are, what you love, your unique family situation and personal mission to create a life that you actually want to live. I want to invite you to join me in saying no to the life of the exhausted supermom, burnout, victim thinking, being pulled in so many directions, suffering through survival mode, or being lost in motherhood, and say yes to building strong families and moving forward on our greatest goals in order to create a fulfilling life that we are excited to wake up to each day and become a soaring mother. This is the Thriving in Motherhood podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Thank you.
It's
been
like
a little while.
It's like your second or third episode.
Yeah,
it's good to have you. So first of all, let's just address what I think some misconceptions might be based on some of the questions we've gotten about planning with each other. So do you want to share some thoughts there?
Sure. One of the first things is probably that we plan very differently. Jessica's talked about her system a lot through her podcast and her courses in business, and my system for planning is really different than that. I've definitely had some influences from trainings or books or workshops that I've attended, but
yeah, and you're in academia, you're a professor.
And so it's just evolved differently for the different seasons of life, and the systems that we have still work together though. So
I think that's really important, is that your husband, like, you don't have to get your husband to be like, watch this Plan a Week You Can Win training, you have to plan just like me. Like, that's not you don't need to. That is not necessary. We definitely don't. He definitely does not plan like me.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, he doesn't want a planner. So, okay. Then I think the next misconception, based on some of the questions we've gotten, is that we are really good at planning weekly and monthly and quarterly and yearly together.
Yeah, the reality is we do pretty good at weekly planning. Almost every Sunday night we check in. There have been a couple of times when we miss it, if busyness or we've got family or guests in town. And I think we can definitely tell on those weeks that we're not as in sync. But on the other side of the spectrum, the most planning that we do is annual planning, looking at the big picture. We do more of a review than planning, even.
I think our life has changed so often since we've been married for 13 years, like living in different places, being in different seasons, whether Andrew's been in grad school or
starting a new
job or doing postdocs or doing PhDs, and we live in different places, and our kids keep changing. I've been pregnant a lot or not pregnant a lot, and so for us, getting into some of those long-term plannings have been tricky because we just have no clue what life is going to look like, or we've kind of been treading water a lot of the time. But I will say, like, with that, just doing the weekly planning every week or most of the time, and doing annual reviews, we've been able to do so much together in our marriage and feel really connected and supported by one another and interdependent. So I think, like, my encouragement there is you actually don't have to be that great at any of this to have it be really effective.
Yeah, and it definitely makes us closer in our relationship, allows us to bring one another's strengths into accomplishing the individual goals that we have. I can rely on you for help about certain things, and you can ask me for help with certain things that you are focused on as well. And so those key touch points weekly or big picture annually, and when we get to celebrate what we accomplished, those are really important.
Yeah, and just like we talk about here all the time, like the power of doing those 30-day review sessions and the momentum that brings, we experience that when we come together and reflect on our year together, which if you're using the Thriving in Motherhood Planner, that is the very first thing that you do with creating your vision, is reflecting on the previous year. And so I would say that is what it's that exercise that Andrew does and I do together.
Yeah, and I love that reflection and review, because we always learn so much after the busy years that we've had. It's like, oh, we did do that. We accomplished that. We did this project. We made it through that challenge. And there's always so many...
He traveled this much, which means I'm that awesome.
Yeah, and there's always so many more things than we think. If if we don't take that time to do the review, it's just what's in your head, then you're going to miss things for sure.
Yeah. So, and then I think the third misconception is that we follow a clear checklist and do it exactly the same every time. That's also totally false.
Yeah, there's definitely reasons that we'll adjust our weekly plan if we've got kids coming in and interrupting, or it's late and we don't have that much time, or we're
traveling,
And so we scale it up or down depending on what bandwidth we have.
And also, I think we're very aware of what actually has to be talked about and what would be nice to be talked about. Yeah. And so...
And that's come over time, too, as we've just gotten into the process.
Yeah, which we'll share with you coming up, so we can help shortcut that for you. So let's go back to the very beginning. Do you remember how we You don't remember how we started weekly planning?
We were just talking about this, so I know the answer. Basically, both of us came from kind of planning, organizing backgrounds. So we've got parents that are pretty organized. My mom was always making lists, and so that was a trait that I inherited. And
in fact, I remember exactly where we were on a date when Andrew told me he liked making lists, and I thought this could work. Could work. And then when he told me his mom used Franklin Covey planners, just like my parents used Franklin Covey planners, that was sealed the deal.
Yeah. So Jessica has often used a planner until she developed her own, and used that based on the systems that found a fit for her. And so that is something that you've always been tinkering with as well in our relationship.
Yeah. So I grew up in a household where every Sunday we planned as a family. Like, my parents would have a meeting and then the kids would come join. So that was already a habit that I left, my family with. Did you guys have?
We didn't really do any kind of weekly plannings on a regular basis, but whenever we had big events coming up, like trips or something like that, we'd probably check in. And my mom has a big calendar on her wall, so that was a place where we could always go and check, see what's coming up and what we were preparing for.
Yeah. So with that, I think we just fell into it pretty naturally early on in our marriage. It just became a thing that we kept doing on Sunday nights. So Andrew, I would love to know, what does planning look like for you? Just when you do a weekly planning session, what does it look like? Because it's very different for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest things for my weekly planning are, first off, looking at whatever events I have scheduled, what's on the calendar already, and we have shared calendars between us, so I can kind of see the ebb and flow of your week, as well as the things that I've got going on.
And we just use a Google Calendar for that.
Yeah. Sometimes my work calendar events don't quite make it into that shared space, and so depending on how things are organized, that has led to
surprises.
Surprises. Yes. But yeah, just trying to get a sense of what is coming up in this week, what those obligations are that are kind of fixed. And then outside of that, the pattern that I have been consistent about is thinking about different domains of my life, my work. So I've got personal, I've got some research tasks that I'm focusing on, and teaching tasks that I'm focusing on. I might have certain other projects that go in those, or if it's big enough, maybe I'll make this other area where I want to be more specific. But I'll kind of think about what goals and activities I have in each of those spaces. And then the third step that usually follows our weekly planning together is putting some of those things on the calendar, so that actually, I know when I'm going to be working on some of those tasks, at least in an ideal world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you do that, because he uses just a piece of paper, a journal, I think a lot of weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, digital. I started doing it digitally now, but for a long time I just had a piece of paper and was keeping track of the things that I had there and could physically cross it off. So yeah, I've had both systems.
Yeah. And I think you've been really good about like being like, okay, I want to take care of these things at home. I want to take care of these things at work. Like you've always been good at including all domains, like including family things. Yeah, it's good. So we've already talked about we plan on Sundays.
Yeah.
So what do we bring? And I will say like this looks like us. We put the kids to bed at least 90% of the way there, and then when we think it's 100, but it's actually 90.
And then we'll try and start our planning and set our notebooks down to go and put kids back to bed.
Yeah, so it's probably like around 7:30 or 8 on a Sunday night that we're sitting down to do this. Any later and we're too tired. At least I am. So what information do we, because we plan differently, what information do we each bring to the planning session?
Yeah, I mean, when we are sitting down to talk, I've probably already glanced at my calendar at least and maybe started to jot down some of those tasks in the different areas that I'm working on. If I haven't gotten a really exhaustive list, I've at least got some of the big things that I want to focus on. And so when we are sitting down, I'm either grabbing my laptop or pulling it up on my phone so that I have that as a tool to take notes and share my thinking.
And then I bring my planner, which by this point I've wanted to make sure that my events that I've written down in my planner and on the calendar are the same, because sometimes they're in different, like I just need to update both sources. And then I want to have thought through what my big 3 are for the week and know what my priorities are so that we can have like a really effective communication about what needs to happen, not just the events, but what am I trying to get done.
Yeah, and I didn't use that same language, but it's kind of the same idea. I'm thinking about what the biggest things that I want to accomplish, or at the end of the week, what I would love to have done, like those important things.
And then when we're really on our A game, we're also thinking about like what do the kids need from us this week, what are like kind of thinking some holistically for our family.
And those are some things that come up because when we start our planning, we start by reviewing some of those set events, and that can include like what things are going on for our kids, what things they need, or what events you have planned that I'll need to give a little bit more, or vice versa.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing too, like our kids are getting old enough now that if they're like, hey, when are we going to do this? Or like they know we're planning. And so they have started putting things on the agenda. Like, hey, can you talk to Dad about this? When can we do this? When are we going to make this happen? So the kids are figuring us out.
So after that first step, you agree kind of looking at the calendar is kind of where we start?
Yeah.
What do you say is next?
Yeah, so I think our very first thing is just like we talk about in planning a week you can win. We just look at the calendar first.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, like this last week that we planned, there was so much on the calendar that it wasn't even deciding who was going to do what. We just needed to figure out what on the calendar,
and then we can figure out who's going to do what.
Yeah,
later.
Eventually, yeah.
Or what we need to cancel and change, what plans we need to change.
Yeah. So, okay, after we look at the calendar, it's on Google Calendar, it's in our individual planning systems. What do we do next?
I mean,
pop quiz.
For me, I think it's just like sharing some of our big goals for the week, right? Or if there's a certain event maybe that's on the calendar, but it's like this appointment at Tuesday at 2:00 is really important and I'm going to need my full attention for it. So we kind of share some of those priorities.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is this only, like we can do this in 15 minutes?
15 minutes?
Yeah, 10, 15 minutes. This isn't like a very long thing every time. And
even if we just share some of the scheduled things to make sure that we're on the same page with what our week is going to look like, sometimes that happens day to day if we are really in a lurch. But even if we have just shared what the scheduled things are and then what some of our big goals are, if we leave off there, I think that we're pretty good. I think we're okay.
That's like the minimum viable. But if we're like, if we have some time, if we have some bandwidth, which I would say we do most of the time, we keep going. So we often circle back around and start figuring out the logistics, like the nitty-gritty details of who's going to be where when, who's going to do what with the kids during what times, when do we need to like hand people off. Andrew's schedule is it's not 9 to 5. He works at nights and on the weekends.
I'm traveling.
He travels a lot, yeah.
And so that just requires some changes. And then, on the one hand, that gives some flexibility because I can help with appointments during the day. Kids are going to a doctor's appointment or whatever. But sometimes it means there's longer commitments where you've got the kids. And at least knowing in advance, I think, that those times are coming up is helpful, so you can start thinking about like a plan. What other help do I need? How do I need to change the meals to make that a smooth time?
Yeah, and that's actually a good point. I haven't done my meal planning by this point. So we do our planning, like individual planning for the week on Sunday. We talk through things together on Sunday, but my meal planning is typically coming on Wednesday when I already have a good picture of what's happening, and it lines up with when the new sales come out at Aldi's. So that's how I plan our meals. But that's not happening at the same time.
Anything else other than, just kind of digging a little bit deeper?
Well, I think there's also, and I feel like we can't gloss over this. I don't want to gloss over this part so much because like there's a lot of times where it's not just logistics, right? It's saying like, okay, this is really important to me. This is what I'm working on. This is what matters to me. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing, oh, okay, this is how I can support you in that, and vice versa.
Or even just asking like, how can I help you with that? That sounds like that's really important.
Yeah. And then there's also just this element of what's not working and how can we improve it. So like earlier this year, we were trying to figure out where Andrew was going to work because he had been working from home for
a couple of years now.
With COVID, yeah. And we just realized like that was not effective anymore. And the biggest, like during one of these planning sessions, we realized, okay, one of the biggest holdup is food. And we decided to get meal prep containers. And that was like top of my list that week was getting meal prep containers so we could start sending leftovers and make it easy for him to get out the door. So that's just one example. But we also really use this time to identify clearly what the problems are and then work together to solve them. And like in this case, it was Andrew's problem about getting to work, but I was happy to go get the meal prep containers and figure that out.
And now you use them just as much as
me. I love them. I use them all the time. It's my secret to eating good lunches.
Yeah, I mean, when we can find those solutions to problems together, it's something that really just makes our whole house run more smoothly. Mm-hmm. And it's a win-win.
Yeah, and a win-win is Stephen Covey language. But I think the other thing is that we're really focusing here on being interdependent and doing more together than we can do by ourselves. Mm-hmm. So this isn't like us spinning plates individually. I feel like this is us trying to... trying to figure out where we can reach over and help each other out. Mm-hmm. Because we each have different strengths that we recognized after years in marriage. And it's great to be able to get into projects with each other and see what you're working on, celebrate what you're working on, be able to share those things. Yeah, and so after we have a good picture of this, that's when Andrew circles back around. Now, now that we understand the scheduled things, now that we understand the priorities, now we understand the have-tos and who's doing what. Yeah, because by that point, I know a little bit of the blocks of time that I have to work in. Mm-hmm. So I can start putting things on my calendar, sending emails or making some appointments to follow up with people and schedule them into those spaces that might fill in. Kind of using like the time blocking method because while you don't always work normal hours, most of the time you are leaving around like 9 a.m. and getting home around 5:30 or 6. Yeah. So like you do that. You just also have extra things too. I just have some blocks in the day too because I've got some interruptions during the day, meetings or other appointments and things. Yeah. So he's using that really great method that I don't recommend for us as moms. Of like putting it on the calendar. Yeah, put it on the calendar. Right? Yeah, he puts it on the calendar. Yeah, because honestly, once I'm out the door, I don't have the interruptions of the kids as much. And that was a big part of that change that we talked about for getting me out the door. Yeah, just being able to get focus time. Yeah. Because he does work full time. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about weeks that we don't plan together. Mm-hmm. And I would say this year there's probably been, I can think of probably like 3 weeks that were horrible because we didn't do this. So most of the time we do, but the weeks that we don't just really are so frustrating. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of the specific weeks that you're thinking of probably, but I mean, I know the general feeling of
really just going day by day. And even if we didn't get our planning on Sunday night, one of the things that we do try and do is check in on Monday morning at least. Like, what does the day look like? Or the next few days look like, so that we can get on the same page about what's coming up. And it's just a scaled down version of our typical weekly planning.
But I think like one of the byproducts of this, and I mean, tell me if you think it's different, but I feel like for me, those weeks when we don't do a weekly planning, it becomes very much like we're just managing. Like we are just taking care of the essentials and the kids and what has to happen, and those higher level, like that part where we feel like we're really supporting each other, I feel like gets completely dropped. Yeah, and so by the end of the week, I'm typically really grumpy and angry. Even if I did all the same things that I would have done, just not having that clarity of like, hey, we're doing different things, but we're working together, really bothers me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, I think on those weeks that we miss our main weekly planning, the importance of checking in day to day is increased. We'll get that Monday morning conversation at least before I'm out the door, but I feel like thankfully we're coming back together pretty often to try and check in as much as we can. It doesn't have the same effect though if we don't have that. I agree. We're kind of managing things rather than jumping in and supporting and balancing.
Yeah, I think so. So, Andrew, any final thoughts or tips or wisdom that you want to share with the other people out there that are wanting to together?
I think that trying to reflect and figure out your own individual system at least is helpful. Figure out what works for you and try it out. Tinker with it a little bit. And so if the Thriving in Motherhood planner and the system works for you, then that's fantastic.
Is this for the dads out there?
I don't know. You make some changes, you cross off your whatever section and change the heading there. That's fine too. Maybe don't cover your ears, Jessica. But all of that can come together as a couple, and you can figure out how to get on the same page about things, make some progress together, and support each other in it.
Yeah, I really like that last idea of just figure out what works for you and then learn how to communicate the things that matter most.
Yeah.
And that is something that even though we were doing weekly planning sessions, I would say that was something we were not good at.
Right.
For a very long time. In part because maybe we didn't know what mattered most, like to ourselves. Like that was a learning process. We were just talking about this. Like we didn't know what we cared about, but then we also didn't know how to talk about it, even if we did. And so.
Yeah, it's been great to learn over time and use those weekly plannings as an opportunity to look ahead, also look back and learn from where we've been. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for joining the podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's great. If you guys want him back, let me know.
You post some questions, reach out.
Yeah. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and watch the Plan a Week You Can Win training just to help give you some ideas about how to plan for yourself and be able to take these, not just the things that have to get done, but the things that you want to have done into a planning session with your spouse. And you can find a link to that below. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And I will talk to you next week.
Yeah, maybe later.
Maybe you'll see him later.
Where you are planted, watch the blossoms grow.